The walls of a high-rise apartment are not thick enough to block the sound of a woman screaming for her life. The neighbors in the Golden Garden building heard everything. Not one of them opened their door. This is the last footage of 29-year-old Tatiane Spitzner alive. What happened in the 15 minutes after this clip ended, behind a door no camera could see through, would force an entire nation to ask itself a question it had spent generations avoiding. But this story didn't begin in an elevator at 2:42 in the morning. It began 5 years earlier, when a young lawyer met a man who seemed like everything she was looking for. By all accounts, Tatiane Spitzner was the kind of person who made a room feel more alive just by walking into it. She was 29 years old and worked as an attorney at her father's law firm in Guarapuava, a city of roughly 180,000 people in the mid-south of Paraná State, Brazil. She loved running. She loved cycling. She loved planning things, trips, workouts, nights out with the wide circle of friends who adored her. She was generous, social, and relentlessly optimistic. The kind of person who always had a next thing she was excited about. Her sister Luana would later describe the person Tatiana was before everything changed.
Sempre fui animada, sempre queria fazer as coisas, sempre estava com planos para tudo, assim. Ai, quero viajar, quero ir na academia, quero deixar meu corpo bonito, quero viajar, quero correr, quero fazer isso, quero fazer aquilo.
That energy, that appetite for life. It was the first thing people noticed about Tatiana. It would also be one of the first things Luis Felipe Manvaler tried to take from her. Luis Felipe Manvaler was 32 years old, a university biology lecturer with a doctorate from Germany. He practiced jiu-jitsu and taekwondo. He was intensely devoted to physical fitness, tall, strong, disciplined. To those who didn't know him well, he appeared serious and focused. To those who did, he was something else, reserved, distant, difficult to read. Gym owner Marcelo Virtuoso, who saw Luis train daily, described him simply. He would greet people, train, and leave. He wouldn't talk to anyone. Tatiana and Luis met in early 2013 at a bar in the Batel neighborhood of Curitiba. Luis was immediately taken with her. They began dating, and what followed was fast. On November 15, 2013, Luis proposed. 18 days later, on December 3rd, they married in a civil ceremony in Guarapuava. No large wedding, no celebration, a registry office and a signature. The speed had a practical explanation. Luis had secured a doctoral scholarship in Germany and could only bring Tatiana if they were legally married. On the surface, the urgency made sense. Two young, attractive professionals, a lawyer and a professor, beginning an adventure together in Europe. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Shortly after the wedding, the couple moved to Essen, Germany, where Luis would spend the next 3 years pursuing his doctorate. Tatiana didn't speak German. She didn't speak English. She was thousands of miles from her family, her friends, and the law practice she loved, entirely dependent on her husband, in a country where she couldn't communicate with anyone. It was there, away from every person who might have noticed, that the control began. Luis took over the couple's finances. He demanded Tatiana hand over her paychecks and criticized any purchase she made on her own. He dictated what she could wear. Clothes he considered unacceptable were destroyed. He refused to help with any housework and rejected her request to hire a cleaner, insisting that domestic duties were her responsibility, despite the fact that she was a working attorney. He called her Bosta Albina, albino dung, a reference to her fair skin. When friends back in Brazil occasionally noticed bruises on Tatiana's arms during visits, she brushed them off as accidents. She made excuses. She smiled and changed the subject. The couple returned to Guarapuava in late 2016 and rented apartment 403 in the Golden Garden building downtown. Luis began teaching at a local university. Tatiana went back to work at her father's law firm, and the control only intensified. Police would later find a large stash of anabolic steroids in the couple's apartment. Gym owner Virtuoso noted that Luis had grown significantly larger in the months before the killing. A psychiatrist would later confirm that steroid use can intensify aggression, trigger extreme rage reactions, and impair impulse control. This was not an excuse. It was fuel on a fire that had been burning for years. By early 2018, Tatiana had reached her breaking point. On March 8th, International Women's Day, she met her close friend Juliana Santos at the gym, and for the first time, opened up completely. Luis was treating her badly, she said, demeaning her, contradicting her in front of others. She said he had gotten to the point of hating her. During a getaway with friends shortly after, Tatiana broke down entirely, confessing that she was afraid of her husband and that she wanted out. She went to her family with the same message. Her sister Luana described what happened next.
Ela chegou pro meu pai e falou, ó pai, quero divorciar, não tá dando mais certo, falou os motivos dela e todo mundo apoiou ela.
Tatiana went to her father with the same words.
Pai, acho que eu vou divorciar. Falei, eu tomei um choque, falei, puxa, mas o que tá acontecendo, né? Não dá mais, simplesmente não dá mais.
Ela queria separar, que não tava dando certo, mas era isso que a gente conversava mais.
Her family supported her. Luis Felipe did not. He refused to discuss divorce. He alternated between threats and promises to change. And the months that followed became a slow constriction, a woman trying to leave a marriage to a man who would not let her go. July 21st, 2018. Luis Felipe Manvaler's 32nd birthday. The couple had just returned from what appeared to be a pleasant vacation, a trip to the Rio Quente Hot Springs Resort in Goiás State with Tatiana's parents. Plans were made last minute for a birthday celebration at a restaurant in downtown Guarapuava with a small group of friends. Tatiana's sister Luana would also be there. That afternoon, Tatiana went to a nail salon to look her best for the evening. The appointment ran longer than expected. When she got home, Luis was already dressed and furious. They were late. They drove to the restaurant. Both drank heavily throughout the evening. And at some point during the celebration, Tatiana saw messages on Luis's phone, birthday wishes from women. She confronted him. He dismissed her, insisting he was simply replying to well-wishers. Witnesses would later describe a palpable tension between the couple for the rest of the night. By the early hours of July 22nd, the party was over. But the night was not. Exclusive bar surveillance footage, obtained later by journalist Roberto Cabrini, captured the final moments before the couple left. At 2:25 a.m., Luis Felipe appears on camera, walking through the bar alone. He appears to be searching for someone. At 2:32, he meets Tatiana near the exit. They leave the bar together, cross the street, and get into her white Chevrolet Cruze. The drive home was less than 5 minutes. What happened when they arrived would be captured, almost in its entirety, by a building full of security cameras. At 2:34 a.m. on July 22nd, 2018, the white Cruze stopped on the street in front of the Golden Garden building. And here, the building's security cameras began to record. The exterior camera captures the car, stationary, with movement visible inside. Luis is striking Tatiana across the face. She opens the passenger door, trying to get out. He pulls her back in. Luis then drove the car into the building's underground parking garage. What had started in a restaurant and continued in a car was about to escalate into something the cameras would document in devastating detail. Inside the garage, multiple security cameras captured what followed. Luis exits the vehicle, walks to the passenger side, and drags Tatiana out. He presses her against the car. What happens next is difficult to watch. Luis places Tatiana in a rear-naked chokehold, a martial arts technique he practiced, known in Brazilian fighting as the mata leão. Tatiana appears to lose consciousness. Her body goes limp. Then she recovers. For the next several minutes, Tatiana tries to hide. She ducks behind pillars. She crouches between parked cars. Luis finds her each time. And then Tatiana breaks free. She runs. She reached the elevator first. Tatiana is inside. She presses the buttons to close the doors. For a fraction of a second, it looks like they might close in time. At 2:42 a.m., Luis Felipe Manvaler forced Tatiane Spitzner into apartment 403 on the 4th floor of the Golden Garden building. No cameras recorded what happened inside, but the building was not silent. Neighbors later told police they were awakened by screams, a woman's voice crying for help. One neighbor looked out their window and saw a woman leaning over the 4th floor balcony railing, crying heavily, her head down. The screams continued, and in a building full of people who could hear those cries through their walls and their windows, not a single person opened their door. Not one person walked into the hallway. Not one person went to apartment 403. Not one person called the police. For 15 minutes, Tatiane Spitzner was dying in a building where everyone could hear her. No one came. At 2:57 a.m., exactly 15 minutes after the elevator footage ended, an exterior security camera recorded a body falling from the 4th floor and striking the sidewalk below, a drop of approximately 40 feet. The body lay on the pavement for 3 minutes before anyone appeared. What the cameras captured next revealed something beyond violence. They revealed calculation. Luis Felipe Manvaler came downstairs. Witnesses in nearby buildings saw him run to Tatiana's body on the sidewalk. One heard him shout, "My love, wake up." He picked up Tatiana's body and carried it back inside. He took her body back to the apartment. A few minutes later, Luis Felipe returned to the elevator. He had changed his shirt. He was carrying a rag. He wiped blood from the floor, from the walls, from the buttons Tatiana had pressed 20 minutes earlier trying to save her own life. At approximately 3:06 a.m., Luis Felipe Manvaler drove away from the Golden Garden building. He had been seen. Residents in nearby buildings had watched a man pick up a body from the sidewalk and carry it back inside. They were already calling emergency services. But Tatiana was already dead, and Luis was already gone. Police responded to the Golden Garden building within the hour. They found blood on the sidewalk and in the elevator, but no body. Luis had taken Tatiana back to the apartment. Officers entered apartment 403 and found her in the living room. Luis, meanwhile, was driving. He headed west on the BR 277 highway, toward the Paraguayan border. He covered approximately 185 miles before exhaustion overtook him. He fell asleep at the wheel and crashed the car near the city of São Miguel do Iguaçu. Police found him at the accident scene and placed him under arrest. Prosecutor Pedro Henrique Brazao Papais was blunt about what Luis had been attempting. Minutes after Tatiana's death and the distance he traveled in that short time, it should also be pointed out that his likely destination was Paraguay, so if he is released, if he is set free, there's a risk he'll try again to evade criminal responsibility. Luis told officers he was innocent. He said Tatiana had jumped from the balcony on her own, that he had been too disturbed by the image of her falling to stay.
Eu sou inocente, eu amo muito.
But investigators didn't just have cameras, they had a body, and the forensic evidence would dismantle Luis Felipe Manvaler's story completely. The story quickly made national headlines. The autopsy would dismantle Luis's version of events, piece by piece. Handprint and fingerprint impressions were found around Tatiana's throat. They matched Luis's large hands. Her hyoid bone, a small bone located at the front of the neck, was completely fractured. This injury is commonly associated with manual strangulation and is virtually impossible to sustain by accident. The fracture was so severe it was visible externally and palpable to the touch. But the most crucial finding was this: if Tatiana had been alive and conscious during the fall, whether she jumped, as Luis claimed, or was thrown, her body would have automatically produced adrenaline and cortisol. These are the stress hormones the human body releases in response to terror, to the awareness of falling. They are involuntary. They cannot be suppressed. Investigators tested for these markers. There were none. Tatiane Spitzner was already dead when her body went over the balcony. Prosecutor Diana Rampazzo stated it plainly. Our investigation proves that the victim was killed inside the apartment by asphyxiation, and her body was thrown over the balcony of the apartment. The 15-minute gap now had its answer. Luis had strangled Tatiana to death inside apartment 403, using the same chokehold technique the garage cameras had already documented, and then thrown her body from the 4th floor to stage a suicide. The cleanup, the flight, the tearful declaration of innocence, All of it was a calculated attempt to escape the consequences of what he had done. There was just one problem. The cameras had been rolling the entire time. Luis Felipe Manvaler was charged with murder qualified as femicide and procedural fraud for attempting to clean the crime scene and obstruct the investigation. His defense team spent the next 3 years delaying. They filed motions to postpone. They attempted to move the trial out of Guarapuava, arguing the case had received too much publicity for an impartial jury. The judge denied the request. The case was national. Nowhere would be different. The trial finally began in May 2021. It lasted 7 days. Over 7 days, prosecutors presented the CCTV footage, the forensic reports, text messages, and testimony from Tatiana's friends, documenting years of physical and emotional abuse that preceded the night of July 22nd. The defense dismissed all female jurors. The panel that would decide Luis Felipe Manvaler's fate consisted of 7 men. Luis took the stand. He apologized to Tatiana's family for the assaults captured on camera, but he maintained his story. Tatiana, he said, had jumped from the balcony on her own. He denied the murder. The 7 men deliberated. Their verdict was unanimous. Guilty, on all counts, femicide and procedural fraud. Luis Felipe Manvaler was sentenced to 31 years, 9 months, and 18 days in prison, with an additional indemnity of approximately $25,000 to Tatiana's parents. His defense attorney, Claudio Dalladone, called the verdict clearly contrary to the evidence. The jury, 7 men, every one of them, disagreed. Tatiane Spitzner's case became one of Brazil's most high-profile femicide cases, not because what happened to her was rare, but because, for once, the cameras captured what normally happens behind closed doors. When TV Globo's Fantastico program broadcast the CCTV footage, the reaction was seismic. Millions watched a woman fight for her life in a parking garage and an elevator while an entire building slept, or chose not to act. The numbers were staggering. Brazil has the 5th highest femicide rate in the world. In 2017 alone, more than 1,100 women were murdered by partners or ex-partners. And for generations, the culture had an answer for what to do when you heard violence through a neighbor's wall. In a fight between husband and wife, don't stick a spoon in. It was more than a saying. It was a social contract, an agreement passed down through generations, that what happened between a man and a woman behind a closed door was no one else's business. After Tatiana's death, a campaign emerged with a different message. Stick a spoon in. The state of Parana designated July 22nd, the date Tatiana died, as the state day against femicide. The cameras showed a country what it already knew, but had chosen not to see. Tatiana's father put it simply.
Família vive tormento, sabe? De lá para cá eu não tenho vida. Fazem 2 anos e meio, vai fazer 2 anos e meio que eu não tenho vida.
Tatiana's sister Luana created an Instagram page called Todos por Tatiane Spitzner, Everyone for Tatiana, which has gathered significant followers across platforms. It exists for one purpose, to make sure no one forgets. At Jorge Spitzner's law firm in Guarapuava, Tatiana's office remains exactly as she left it. The desk, the chair, the work she never finished. She was a woman who loved to run, to ride her bike, to make plans, to live. She was a lawyer who worked alongside her father. She was a sister, a daughter, a friend to more people than she probably knew. Tatiane Spitzner was 29 years old.